Hey everybody, it's John Morlan here. Thank you so much for joining us in week 2 of our study of God's 10 commandments, or God's 10 sayings, his 10 words, principles that speak more than just don't do this or don't do that, but actually describe life in the world God is trying to build inside of us and in the world around us. And so, man, I'm so grateful that God gave us these commands. He gives us a pointer to the lifestyle he is leading us into, not only on the planet, but also the life of heaven. And also, I'm grateful to you that you're sticking with it. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is say, I wish I could do that, but to not make time for it. Thank you for making time for God and your relationship. And also, if you're participating with a group, thank you for taking time to weigh these things out. Be prepared when you come to group and to talk intelligently and wisely and authentically. So thank you so much for sticking with it. We hope that you'll do it through each and every week as we're studying these 10 sayings. Well, I'd hope you would join me. If you're looking on your guide, look in week 2, day 1, and I want to read the main reading, what is command number 2. Of course, by way of review, we realize that word number 1, saying number 1, command number 1 was God is powerfully rescuing me, and he is powerfully rescuing us. The only way into the commandments and the only way into the lifestyle, the only way into the relationship is to recognize, as we saw last week, that God is our rescuer. We need God's rescue. We cannot pull ourselves out of Egypt. Only he can do that miraculously. And we see that's true all the way. We need God's forgiveness, his power, his love, and he will rescue us out of whatever slavery we might find ourselves in to put us into his way. And so that's saying number 1. Saying number 2 is this: nothing before God and God before everything. Nothing before God and God before everything. Or maybe even a simple way of describing this command, as we'll see, is I am jealous for you, God says. I am jealous for you. Well, look at what it says in Exodus chapter 20, verse 3. It says, you must not have any other God but me. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them. Now, as you pointed out, if you were going your way through the reading, sometimes it's difficult to understand exactly what's being said if it's only by negation. It's not this, not this, not this, not this. Of course, saying what it isn't helps to get us a little bit closer. We're going to find as the readings continue to go on that telling us what it isn't also helps us to get to what it's supposed to be. And what is it not supposed to be? Well, we need to not be possessed by other priorities, other gods, other things that we put above Yahweh. Now, when I use that word possessed, I don't necessarily mean it, although it can include this, because satanic and demonic power is real in our world. But I don't necessarily mean that exactly in the same way that we need to be exorcised a demon from inside of us. To be possessed by other idols means that they take our attention, they captivate us, they make our lives ordered to them. One of the beautiful things that Nahum Sarna, who is one of the leading scholars over the last century in within Judaism, he was saying that, in fact, the Hebrew in this language, while it reads in English for us, you must not have any other God, what it in fact means is to be to. Much in the same way, a relationship for a husband to be to a wife and a wife to be to a husband, it's actually the same kind of language that would be used to describe how they have mutual possession of one another, which is incredible. It's beautiful. So it's not simply that we cannot have, meaning something physical. We cannot have an idol. We cannot take something that's physical. It includes that, but it's not limited to that. It means that there could be something that would be in our heart that would take possession of and captivate us to take our hearts and our minds away from the one and only living God, which is incredible. As you learned in the second day's reading for this particular week, that only God who made us can name us. Only God who made us is the maker, and he alone can be our God. Nobody else can be a God. No other thing could be a God to us. Only God himself can live inside of us. He could possess us and mean in the most beautiful way. He could come to live inside of us, but that we have that chosen mutual relationship together. Now, as we pointed out by way of illustration, what idolatry is. It's like worshiping the moon, or orbiting around the moon instead of orbiting around the sun. Idolatry is thinking that the moon could give us the ultimate light, or all that light comes from the moon, and that all of our beauty and our warmth would come from it. It's obviously ridiculous. Planets don't orbit around the moon, but that's what idolatry is. And so that's what it isn't. Don't orbit your life around things that that are not your maker and that cannot be your God, cannot order your orbit. Don't order your life around those kinds of things, whatever it might be. And it's not just limited to something that could be carved or shaped, but something that money could be our God. We could be disobeying commandment number 2, just along with commandment number 10, letting things, coveting other people's things. I wish I had all this and this and this. And then all of a sudden our life is out of whack. But that's what we're not supposed to do. What is this commandment telling us that we ought to do? What is this thou shalt in commandment number 2? Well, simply to follow the illustration that you saw was to have our life ordered and orbiting around the sun of our universe. Of course, here we're talking about Yahweh himself, God himself, to have our life orbiting around him. Worship is putting our life in the way he wants the universe to work, right? And so we begin to orbit around him, and it's also then obeying our Creator's gravity. And this is a really important distinction. Worship is obeying our Creator's gravity. Well, now, take the illustration all the way down. Somebody might say, well, no terrestrial body could escape the gravity of the sun. How is that possible? Which is what is beautiful, is also a little bit disturbing. It's a little bit chaotic, in fact. In the universe of God, in the universe of the soul, God allows us to pull ourselves out of his orbit. That is the only way, in fact, that we know that we can put ourselves into his orbit, that we choose him, which I believe is written through every single page of the Bible, where we choose to not simply obey, but to love and to have him be our God, to love him with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our strength. It's a choice that God asks us to do. But somehow, in the way the universe works, he will allow us to be out of orbit with him and not have our life ordered by him. And so he asks us to do something by choice, which brings us back to commandment number 1 that we learned last week, which is to say, I need rescuing. That's the first step. In order to love God, we need to recognize what God did. And he wants to rescue us. He wants to forgive us of all of our sin, of all of our brokenness, of all of our confusions. All the other things we put ourselves in orbit around, we need to say no more to that. And we choose him. And so we need to recognize that only God himself can be the one that rescues us out of bad orbits and puts us in. But what happens next? When we say, God, rescue me, what does love look like? What is it? Even Jesus himself says, if you love me, you obey my commandments. God, in that way, is our thou shalt. If God, in fact, is really jealous for us, he longs for our heart. It's more than just simply actions that he's asking of us. Don't do this, don't do this. He's asking for more than a list. Just like those of you who are parents want so much more than just your kids to obey you like robotically. It's to be in a relationship. God, in fact, then, is our thou shalt. To join him, to be in his orbit, is to live inside of his ways. And these commandments begin to introduce that to us. God is our thou shalt. Now, what does that look like to love God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all of our strength? It means God comes before everything, because God doesn't orbit around us. He does not orbit around us. We choose to orbit around him. So I guess maybe one of the questions, and if you choose to pause the study right now for a moment, is maybe to answer a question, a very difficult question to answer yourself internally, and maybe even harder to talk about in a group, but something maybe to prompt your conversation now or later. What idols is God maybe jealous of right now in your life? What is something that has taken your orbit and changed the trajectory a bit? You still want God in your life, of course. We all want God to be our benefactor, to be our blessing, to be our go-to when we really need him. But something else is pulling our orbit away from him. Is there something that needs to be brought back into his orbit? Something to think about. God does not orbit around us, but we can choose to orbit around him by choosing to obey commandment number 1. Now commandment number 2, to bring our life into orbit with him by obeying his commands. So maybe a conversation. I'm getting ready to talk not only from word, what we just talked about, we're going to talk next here about stirred. Okay, everybody, let's move into the second section. Like we said last week, we have a pattern. We talk about word, stirred, and then in a little bit we're going to talk about nerd stuff, But today we're going to talk right now about being stirred. And what we're going to find out is that this may be the most common sin, breaking of the third commandment, the third saying, the third word. Now, a lot of times we look at what we're going to read and we think that this is describing blasphemy. And it's not that it doesn't, it's just that it's not only that. Here's what it reads in Exodus chapter 20, verse 7. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. The Deuteronomy chapter 5 version of that. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Which brings us to commandment number 3. At least our statement of it is this: reverence for God in my heart lives in my words. Reverence for God in my heart lives in my words. If God truly possesses us, right? If we have a mutual relationship, a mutual possession, if he really possesses my heart, he lives there, then it will reside, it will live in my words. One of the things that Jesus said in the Gospels was this: in Matthew 12, he said, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. That really scares me. I don't know about you. It scares me because it's so powerful. It's so true. It's something I want to live to. It's something I aspire to, but my words, they just come out so quickly. They're reflexes, but our words more and more reflect who we are and what's going on. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Now, what does that mean? So a lot of times, I said a moment ago, this is referred to as the sin of blasphemy, and of course it includes that. Kalal is this word that is used in that passage. Later on, just a chapter or two after the 10 commandments are given, it says in Exodus 22, you must not blaspheme God or curse a leader among your people. There, again, it highlights the fact that not only do we not speak God's name in vain, we don't speak something that's a curse of him or even a curse of other leaders. To blaspheme God is also included in cursing other people. Here in the nation of Israel would be to curse a leader. And it can mean that. It means to condemn or to curse. And so in that way, somebody can blaspheme by, shaking their fist at God and whatever, perceived slight or action that has happened around them and they think God is to blame. Somebody can blaspheme the name of God by doing that. But what's interesting is kalal can also mean this. It can mean to take something lightly or to be swift or to be trifling. So it means that it's not just simply shaking our fist at God, but it's actually something much lighter and much more sinister than that, is to act like God's name is not that big of a thing to us. We can just talk God here, God there, and just let his name just sort of roll out as if he does not mean anything, to take away his significance. And so God warns us about that. If we are going to practice kalal, not only do we not shake our fist at God, but we also just don't say God, give his name, speak Jesus Christ's name. A lot of times you'll see people blaspheming like that, but they're just being light, like they don't even care. And so he warns us against that. But there is other parts of this. The more that we understand the scriptures, it says that we need to be stirred to change how we talk about everything that we talk about. One of the things that Jesus points out in the Sermon on the Mount is not to swear by God's name or even swear by anything that we associate with God, but just to let our yes be yes and our no be no. Somehow if we just give it what appears to be a solid yes or a solid no, and then our life around it ends up being murky, he's like, that actually is a breakage of commandment number 3. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't be swearing here and there just because you need to prove something. No, I swear by heaven. I swear to God. And we say these words so casually, and he says that, in fact, is what we would often think of as blasphemy. It's misusing God's name for a certain purpose. And one last thing we actually see is that just the use of coarse language. Colossians 3 says, rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips. It is just acting like our words don't mean anything is also a breakage of the commandment. Now, this means the bar is so much higher. Just because we didn't say God's name and then use some curse word after it does not mean that we haven't broken the third commandment. We need to make sure our yeses are yes. We need to make sure that our worship is true. So whenever we walk into worship, the name of God in the presence of God is that it comes from a true heart. We don't just let God's name just lightly slip out of our mouths and our lips. And we need to make sure how we talk because of this. As Jesus said, the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. If Jesus, in fact, if God is our rescuer, commandment number 1, then we are to have his these thoughts captivate us and saturate every thought we have. And so our words will follow because the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. What is your heart full of, and what words right now is God bringing to your attention? Maybe I need to stop saying those kinds of things. Maybe I need to begin to say these kinds of things. Maybe I just need to let my yes be yes and my no be no. That is what we hope you are stirred on. Okay, our last section, we've had words stirred, and now we're going to do a little bit of nerd, a little bit of a digging through. If this is your first video teaching, the nerd section is to maybe work our way through some of the wiring, some of the specifics of a passage that either is really confusing or misunderstood, and get down in there and find out what God is really trying to say. Well, you see at the end of commandment number 2, the second saying, we see it if you're looking in week 2, day 3, you see God say this. We're going to look at the Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 9 and 10 version of this part of the command. He says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. And I am so jealous, I am bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing faithful love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. The obedience to this, or the disobedience to this particular command, the second command, to not have any other gods before us, nothing before God, and God before everything. The consequence of failing to do this is massive in its after effect. And here he says something that draws our eyes. Now, the beautiful part of it is that he says, those who obey, a generation that obeys him, that he will bless thousands of generations who are living like that. And while that stirs our heart, what really draws our attention in this passage is saying, if father's iniquity is so prevalent, he will in fact, it will have an effect 3 and 4 generations deeper in. And we're drawn to that, and we're saying, oh my goodness, is it possible that I could do a sin and God would curse my kids and their kids after them and their kids after them, and maybe even their kids after them. God would curse them because I've made terrible decisions. And while it is certainly true that I can make decisions as a father, as a grandpa, as a great-grandpa, and a great-great-grandpa, I can make decisions that put my family on a trajectory, that put them in environments that take them away from God. Of course, the opposite is true. I can try to put them into contact with the living God, but it's possible that, yes, that could happen, but is God cursing them? That's the difference. To say, is it possible I could put them in an environment and they don't know any different, and they don't know any better, or they just choose to be like me as a sinning father? Yes, but the difference is that God does not curse generations like that. So while there may be, let's say, an alcoholic or abusive father, or a wife who's been unfaithful, it does not mean just because the kids and the grandkids after that have the blood of that person that they automatically get it. What ends up happening is that when you look here's the nerd part, when you look back at that, the version in Deuteronomy chapter 5, that God brings the consequences of the fathers, apostrophe, so plural, the multiple fathers can create the beginnings of a culture, and a culture then permeates, and then it becomes a generation and a people. And then what we see here is a cycle, generational cycle. If you know a little bit about the Old Testament, you know the nation of Israel was very much like this. These gigantic swings of trying to be holy and then just going, nosediving, and generations will go that way. And this is what it's describing. It's not that Bob sinned and so 4 generations of his kids and grandkids, God just cursed, he wrote him off. Because there would be a never-ending cycle there, wouldn't there? If he cursed this one kid, well, this kid's going to repeat what his dad did, and so it would just be a never-ending cycle. It's not that he curses Bob's kids, is that an entire generation chooses to walk away from him, and now it just lasts. It keeps going. The consequences are terrible, and so we have to be mindful of, one, our own sins and our own righteousness. We need to make sure we're showing and revealing God in our life, and so that our kids breathe that oxygen. But he will not curse them because we're a sinner, nor will he automatically make them fireproof because we're holy. Every generation chooses God. We have to choose God, and he will honor those decisions. That we could be a generation who loves the Lord with all of our hearts, our minds, our souls, and our strength, and that our children would do the same. That's a little bit of the nerd that hopefully gets us to stirred because we're listening to the Word. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful conversation. Those of you who are doing small group tonight, and keep on going with the commandments. We love you all.